Hi, Year 12s. This is just a video to have a chat about the extended response question that's in the Health and Human Development exam. So if you've been looking at some past exams or even in the holiday exam we did, you would have noticed that there's generally an extended response question which is worth between 8 and 10 marks. These questions are quite different to the style of questions that we have done in our SACs. They can relate to any content topic. So it could be related to something in Unit 3 or something in Unit 4. And they can also be found anywhere in the exam. So it's not necessarily at the end of the exam. It's often quite early or in the middle of the exam. So you'd really just want to be looking at the mark allocation, and that will tell you that this is the extended response question. In the past, this question usually involves 3 sources or 3 kind of bits of stimulus material that need to be generally analysed and discussed. And we'll look at a few examples. The wording or the instructions for these questions can sometimes be quite vague. What I mean by that is it's not necessarily, really clear what it is that it's asking you to do. Not like the other questions where it might say, explain how this causes this. These can be a bit more vague, which can make it quite difficult to interpret that question. These questions often ask you to link several different skills or areas of knowledge. So again, I'll kind of go through some examples with you. And they usually give you 1.5 pages of writing space. So you're probably starting to think, wow, that sounds a bit like an essay. It kind of is, this question. Now, this is an important thing, and I'm going to talk in a second about my advice on this. But over the past 3 years, so between 2018 and 2020, on average, across all the students in Victoria that do Health and Human Development, the average score for this question is 25%. Okay, so that tells you that this question is tough and that it's very tough to get high marks for it. Okay. Advice that I'm going to give here is that you do not attempt this question until the end of the exam, until you've done everything else, if you do it at all. Okay, I know a lot of people will think, I'll do the highest mark question first. I really strongly advise against doing that. It is very difficult, as I showed before with the statistics, it's very difficult to get good marks for this question, and it takes up a lot of time. Okay, the question itself, it might sound like it's worth a lot, but if we think about it, if it's 8 marks, it's worth 8% of the exam. If it's 10 marks, it's worth 10% of the exam. And again, I'm going to show you some more figures in a second, but it's 10 or less % of the exam. It could very easily take you 30 minutes to do this question, to analyze all the sources and then to kind of interpret the question and write a big response. Okay, that's a quarter of the writing time. Okay, that is not a good use of time. Keep in mind that, only 25, well, the average score for this was only 25%. So you might potentially get maybe 2 marks, which is the average, and you've taken up a quarter of your exam writing time. Okay, it's not a good use of time. Last year, the average exam score for all students, which is what generally becomes a 30 raw study score, was between 39 and 47%. Okay, so it's quite low. People score quite low in the exam. Okay, even getting an A+, the exam score was 73% or higher. So you could get 75% in the exam and get an A+, which puts you, that's kind of looking at a study score probably of 40+. Okay, what that means is if this question is only worth 8 or 10% of the exam, you could not even attempt it and potentially still get 90% in the exam. Okay, you could not attempt it and still only get half marks for the rest of your questions and still get 45%, which has you kind of in the average here. Okay, so the time it takes and how difficult it is to get marks does not make it a good use of your time to start with. Absolutely come back to it at the end, and I am going to go through some tips here on how to have a go at this question, but I very strongly recommend focus on the lower scoring questions in the exam first. So these are things I always recommend. Start with the questions that say identify. Okay, that's literally just writing the name of something. Make sure the wording is completely correct. Then do your things like your describes or outline or your questions with data. Okay, they'd be the next ones to do. Then your explain questions. Okay, you might have like a program evaluation. That could be worth about 6 marks, so that's worth putting a bit of time into. Do all of those first, write them as well as you possibly can and try to maximize your scores for those, and then come to the extended response at the end if you've got time. But just remember, you can do very, very well in this exam without doing this question. If you're aiming for kind of like a 25 to 30 study score, you should absolutely be focusing on other questions because they're more likely to get you the marks that will get you that score. This is just a visual of those scores from last year. So this is the average here, this C+ band, and this is the score range when the exam is out of 200. So the exam is marked twice. So you can see, you take away minus the 20 marks, or last year it was actually only 16 marks because the question was out of 8. That not answering that question has very, very little impact on those scores. All right, I'm just going to run through the last 3 years of this question just so you see what it looks like. Now, obviously, this question has a lot of information and it's actually done over multiple pages. But in the 2018 exam, we had these 3 sources. I know it's quite hard to see here, so make sure you have a look at the actual exam. So there's information from the NDIS quarterly report. Then it's got more information, so another bit of data, and then it's got this quote here. So it's got these 3 sources. At the very top, it says, consider the following 3 sources relating to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Okay, that's all the information it gives you. And then the actual question is, using the information provided, analyse the NDIS's contribution to optimal health and wellbeing as a resource, both individually and nationally. Okay, so there's a bit of information in there, but you would have to interpret this a fair bit, and we'll come back to that at the end. The study design, the examiner's report for 2018 shows the breakdown of how people did in this question. Okay, so the maximum score was 8. We go along here, this is the percentage of students that got each of the possible scores. So 10% of students got 0 for this question. 19% got 1 out of 8. 23% got 2 out of 8. Okay, so kind of the vast majority of students scored 4 or less. So got 50% or lower for this question. Okay, less than 1% of students got full marks. Okay, 1% got 7 out of 8. Keep in mind, this might have taken them 30 minutes, 40 minutes to write this wonderful response that still only got them 8 marks out of 100. Okay, the average was 2.6 marks out of 8. Okay, so it does show you how difficult this question is for all students. This explains a bit about how the question was marked. Okay, so when they're scoring it, they're looking at things like how well it's structured, so the actual quality of the writing, almost like you would be assessed in English, how well the stimulus material had been understood, so kind of interpreted, then connected to the question, and then synthesized or kind of used, so like how they kind of used quotes and things like that, or data. How the stimulus material had been used to support the analysis of how NDIS can promote health and wellbeing, and then the discussion of health and wellbeing as a resource individually and nationally. Okay, so lots of different things they're looking for when they're marking this question. Overall, students found this question very challenging, and then it focuses on a lot of the common errors. But I think it's important to note that, common errors were that students provided information about the NDIS, but didn't connect it with the stimulus material. So what that means is you could be writing something and feel like you're on the right track, because you're talking about the NDIS, you might be talking about how it's funded and who it's used for, and everything you write could be correct, but it's not answering what the question is asking. And you won't, even if you write this wonderful response all about the NDIS, but you're not relating it to health and wellbeing as a resource individually and nationally, or you're not using the quotes, you're not going to get any marks for it. I'm not going to read through all this. You can have a look through these slides or have a look through the examiner's report, but this is an exemplar response. Okay, so keep in mind, we said less than 1% of students got an 8 out of 8. So this is probably a 7 or an 8 out of 8. Okay, you can have a look through, look at the quality of writing. It's beautifully written. That would have taken quite a long time to get those marks. All right, in the 2019 exam, the little intro here says, consider the following 3 sources relating to HIV/AIDS. So there's some data here showing the annual deaths and new infections over several years. Then here there's just this little infographic that has a picture of a girl, and then you can't read it very well, but it says every minute of every day a girl aged between 15 to 24 years gets HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so it's not a lot of information, but it's obviously information they want you to use. And then here there is a stimulus material and some information in there. The question itself is, using the information provided and your understanding of the key features of SDG 3, analyse how addressing the HIV/AIDS epidemic can lead to an improvement in health and wellbeing and the achievement of one other SDG. Okay, lots of words in there, lots of things that they're asking you to do. Again, I'll come back to this at the end. This question was out of 10 marks. So the 2018 was 8 marks, 2019 was 10 marks, average 2.1 out of 10. Okay, again, if we look at this, the absolute vast majority of students were getting 4 or less, only, so 4, 6, 7, 8% of students got higher than 40% on this. Okay, again, they're looking for lots of different things. They were looking at the stimulus material and how it related to the concepts. They looked at how the stimulus material was used to support analysis of addressing HIV/AIDS in relation to SDG 3. They were also looking for another SDG, and then how those things were related to each other, and again, how it was structured and the quality of writing. Again, common errors, discussing the negative impacts of HIV/AIDS. This question specifically said how improving this could lead to improvements. So again, you could be writing stuff that is true, but it's not what the question is asking. Again, here is an exemplar response. I'm not going to read all the way through it, but if you read through this, you'll see that, it's very high level stuff that this student has done. And again, it would have taken a lot of time and thought to come up with this response. Pay attention to particularly how they use information from the stimulus materials, and then also their links to different SDGs, and then also different elements of HIV/AIDS as well. All right, the 2020 exam, so last year's question, consider the following 3 sources relating to global trends and other factors. Okay, so the fact that it says global, you'd be thinking, all right, this is some Unit 4 information. We've got data here of the number of undernourished people in the world over time. We've got a bit of information here about a particular family, and then we've got some quotes here about what young people think about healthy eating. Then the question, use information from all 3 sources and your own knowledge to discuss how global trends and other factors have an impact on achieving SDG 2, which is zero hunger, and the relationship between SDG 2 and 2 features of SDG 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Once again, very low scoring. This time the average is 1.9 out of 8. And again, the very vast majority of students were getting 4 or less, with the majority of students scoring between 0 and 2 marks for this. Again, it was marked on how well it was structured, the stimulus material, students' own understanding was really important for this question, particularly to do with the global trends and other factors. They had to talk about SDG 2, and then the relationship between SDG 2 and 2 key features of SDG 3. Okay, so lots of things that this question was asking. I'm just going to show how you would break down, or the key things to look for in this question. So obviously you want to look at the mark allocation if you are going to attempt it. And it will give you, it always gives you that brief little bit of information at the start. So this is saying global trends and other factors. Okay, so that's something you need to be thinking about. It's not asking, I don't know, about the characteristics of high and low income countries. It's specifically asking you about global trends. So they were things like conflict and mass migration, climate change, digital technologies, global distribution and marketing. And then also other factors as well. So things like food security, clean water and sanitation, stuff like that. Then I would jump straight down to the actual question itself. So read this before you even look at the sources, because you could relate these sources to lots of things that you've learned, but you need to relate it to what the question is asking. So the question is asking, okay, I need to use information from all 3 sources. I need to access my own knowledge. It has said that in the question. So I'm going to have to think about things that aren't just written here that I know. It's asking me about global trends and factors in relation to SDG 2. So I need to be thinking about SDG 2, zero hunger, as I'm reading these. And then it's asking me to link to, for SDG 2 to SDG 3, and that needs to be in relation to those key features. So they're the things I need to be looking for as I'm reading through all of these sources. Okay, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot of different information that you're trying to analyze. Okay, and then I'm going to look through my sources. I've got some data here. If you read through this, there's a fair bit of information in there about global trends. So they talk about conflict. They talk about some of the factors like food security and poverty. And then down here, it shows the difference between high and low income young people. It talks about food security, which is a factor. It talks about poverty, which is a factor. It talks about marketing and distribution, which is a global trend. Again, there's an exemplar response here that you can pause this and have a read through. But my tips, if you are attempting the extended response, as I've said, and I will say it again, do this question last. You could easily get sucked in and caught up with this question and then look at the clock and realize you're halfway through writing time and you don't even know if you're going to get, full marks for this question. And even if you do, you've only got 8% of the exam written. As I said before, read the question. So the question is at the end of all the sources. Read the question first so that when you are reading the sources, you know what to be looking for. So you can narrow down the key information. When you're reading the question, highlight every task and content word that this question is asking for. Nothing in that question is irrelevant. So if they've put it in the question, they want to see that in the answer. Then when you read the sources, you absolutely have to be annotating or highlighting key quotes or bits of data that you can use in your response. You must refer to the stimulus materials in your response, and that's to all 3 of them. Plan your response, okay? No one is just going to be able to write that, have a look at the question once, have a look at the source, and then write out this essay. This needs to be planned. I would recommend breaking it into sections. That should be paragraphs. Remember, this is marked on how well it's structured, so you don't want to be using dot points here, but you might have, 3 clear paragraphs, okay? When you do this, I would recommend answer it in the order that the question is written, okay, just to make it really clear. And I'll go over the questions again in a second so you know what I mean. Use information and data. Quotation marks are the best way to do this, so it's really, really clear. Make sure you relate to all three sources, and keep your response relevant to the question. Like I said, you could write 2 beautiful pages of correct information but get 0 marks if it's not what the question is asking you to do. Okay, so just to recap on what these 3 questions were. So 2018, so I would be highlighting using the information provided. I know I need to do that. Analyze the NDIS's contribution to optimal health and well-being. So I'm thinking here about my dimensions as a resource, both individually and nationally. Okay, there's so much information in there. I would structure by talking about how NDIS relates to optimal health and well-being, using that information. I would then talk about how it's a resource individually, using stimulus material. I would then talk about how it's a resource nationally. And all in this, I'm analysing, okay? So I'm giving my own interpretation of it. The second question, using the information provided and your understanding of the key features of Sustainable Development Goal 3. It says features, so at least 2 key features. Analyse how addressing the HIV/AIDS epidemic, so that's probably where I need to use some of my own knowledge on what that is, can lead to an improvement in health and well-being, so it has to be a positive focus, and the achievement of one other SDG. Okay, so I would be using the information to talk about how HIV/AIDS can be addressed, how improving, so decreasing HIV/AIDS can improve health and well-being globally. I then need to link to 2 features of SDG 3 minimum, and then I need to link to another SDG. Okay, so lots to do there. And the final question, which I kind of broke down already, but using information from all 3 sources and your own knowledge, global trends I need to talk about. So the stimulus there did specifically relate to both conflict and also to global distribution and marketing. Other factors, there's definitely talk about food security, there's talk about poverty. I need to link those to SDG 2. Then I need to link SDG 2 to 2 features of SDG 3. Okay, so lots of different things you can do there. If people want to have a go at answering some extended response questions, I'm more than happy to have a look over them and mark them and give you some feedback. But hopefully this is useful for you in helping you determine how you're going to attempt the exam and which questions you're going to focus your time on. Thank you.